Boldwood presents Warrior of Mercia, written by MJ Porter and read by Sean Barrett. The moral right of the author has been asserted. His performance is owned by Boldwood. The story so far. Young Icel is a healer no more, but is instead becoming a warrior of Mercia, keeping to the oath he swore to his king at Bardney, even though in doing so his beloved uncle, Saintfrith, lost his life fighting the Wessex invasion in the borderlands with the Welsh. Having made a name for himself by saving King Wiglaf's life in the Welsh borderlands, Icel has been tested once more. Forced to live with his enemy behind the high walls of Londonium, living on his wits, he has made some powerful enemies and, more importantly, allies as well. Instrumental in assisting King Wiglaf to reclaim control over the double settlement of Londonia, consisting of the market settlement of Londonwick and the ruins of Roman Londonium, Icel has fought and killed even those he thought were his friends. He has come to realize that enemies aren't always enemies and allies aren't always allies. With Londonia once more secure and King Ecgberht of Wessex restricted to the south of the River Thames, Mercia is whole again under her restored king, Wiglaf. The Mercian Register, A.D. 830. King Wiglaf is once more the rightful king of Mercia. King Ecgberht of Wessex has escaped from Londonia with his life and holds on to the formerly Mercian kingdom of Kent, won in the aftermath of the Battle of Ellendun 5 years previously, his son ruling there in his name. There is no peace accord between the Wessex and the Mercian kingdom, and Mercian warriors remain in Londonia, fearful of a Wessex resurgence. King Wiglaf of Mercia is acclaimed as the rightful ruler of Mercia, eager to reclaim all that King Ecgberht has stolen in the south and King Ælfstan of the East Angles has taken in the east. Chapter 1. Winter, A.D. 830, Tamworth. When Flood assesses me with a sweeping gaze. "It's true, then?" she demands to know. I consider what she sees as she gazes at me. Does she see Icel, the scrawny lad she's been imparting her knowledge to for much of my 16 years? Or does she see a Mercian warrior before her? Does she notice my height and muscles, the bruising on my face, the bandage tied tightly around my right hand, the annoying scuff of black hair on my chin and cheeks? Does she care for me? Or is she merely using me as a means to find out what happened while the king's warriors have been absent from Tamworth? What's true? I retort, but I know to what she refers, and I think it better to admit it than continue my denial. Certainly, I see her as she's always been, back in her rightful place as Tamworth's healer, having been forced to flee when King Ecgberht of Wessex claimed the settlement as his own. King Ecgberht escaped, his son as well, I admit, chin jutting out defiantly. I won't take her criticisms and slights, not after what I've been through. The Wessex king and his earthling might have escaped, but I played my part well, and it wasn't for lack of trying that the Wessex bastards both still live. Then what was the point in sending all those men and losing all those warriors? Their widows will have at least expected Mercia's enemy to be dead. I'm cold and tired and ache all over. I could do without her harsh words, spoken to me outside her healer's workshop, where I rushed to assure her that I am well as soon as I could fight my way through the wall of returning men and horses. I've been forced to leave Brute outside Tamworth's walls. There was no possibility of both of us gaining entry in the press. I'm not entirely sure why I bothered now. The welcoming has hardly been warm. I curse my need to seek her out. She isn't my grandmother. She's no relation of mine. And yet she's all I have. I confess I expected more from her, maybe even some joy that I yet live. Perhaps, I mutter under my breath so that she can't hear me, they should have come themselves. I hear her sharp intake of breath, so she hears me well enough, that sense never having faltered despite the years she wears. But luckily, Theodore and Gaia appear beside me. They've travelled to Tamworth on 2 abandoned horses, their original owners dead on the slaughter field. I don't think Either Theodore or Gaia have enjoyed the journey, but they've managed well enough with the relentless tedium of it. It's been cold, and the nights bitter. I'd have welcomed a warm hearth each night, rather than the firmness of the hard winter ground at my back. I'm sure Theodore and Gaia would have welcomed 3 hearths to warm them, despite the layers of cloaks they wear over their black and brown skin. They might have looked out of place in Tamworth, as opposed to the bustling port of Londonwick, but, of course, everyone is so used to Ealdorman Tidwulf that they don't earn a second glance. And they must think it's all better than having Ecgberht as their master, and being forced to expend their skills on trying to heal men doomed to die, merely because those were the ones who had the coin that Ecgberht demanded, in exchange for any assistance. "Who are you?" Winfloud snaps. I'm relieved they're suddenly the focus of her attention and not me. I examine Winfloud as she barks her questions. She seems well, very well. When I last saw her, she was even thinner than usual, her fleeting hair little more than wisps in the wind. In our time apart, she's managed to put some flesh back onto her bones and lost her sense of shame from having to flee Tamworth when King Ecgberht claimed the settlement. She might have questions for me, but there's still much I don't know about her and the long life she's led. There's still much I don't know about what happened when King Ecgberht was King of Mercia as well as Wessex. I've heard rumours about him employing magics that Winfloud has no belief in, and which a Christian king has no right in using. I'd sooner not believe those reports, and Winfloud's part in them. They belittle her, but then she might well have been compelled to do as he demanded. After all, Ecgberht was Mercia's king by right of conquest. She can't have expected King Wiglaf to win back all that he lost so quickly, and especially not when Mercia's king had fled rather than fight. "Winfloud," Gaia announces in her lyrical voice, "Icel has told us a great deal about you. I am Gaia, and this is my fellow healer, Theodore. He does not yet understand everything we say. We are from the far-distant southern kingdoms over the cold sea that surrounds your land, and then even further south over lands that slowly warm until the sun burns hotter than a furnace. Icel freed us from our cruel master inside Londonium, and now Ealdorman Tidwulf says we are a free man and a free woman to ply our craft wherever we choose." Gaia stumbles over the unfamiliar words of free man and free woman. I don't believe they have always been slaves, and yet here in Mercia the distinction must be made clear. Slaves have a master. Free men and free women might well swear an oath of commendation to their lords, but they're free. They are free to choose to whom they pledge themselves, should they desire to do so. On this dull day, Theodore and Gaia look resplendent, even as tired and exhausted as they must be. How their lives have changed in recent weeks, or at least how I assume they have. They're no longer enslaved, but revered for their skills and accomplishments at healing. Theodore is learning to speak our tongue well, but before Winfloud's scrutiny, even I quake to speak. Winfloud's eyes flicker from me towards Gaia, thin tongue licking at her even thinner lips. She eventually says, "You'd better come inside." And she indicates her wooden workshop, in whose doorway she stands. Theodore bows his head beneath the low door, while Gaia rushes in before him, pleased to be in the warmth of the small space. I think I might get away from Winfloud then, only for her to reach out and grip my arm with her 2 strong fingers. They look weak and aged, but aren't. I'm sure that most people with so many years behind them should have a much less severe grip. Winfloud is used to holding tightly to her patients as they writhe beneath her ministrations. I should have remembered that. "Well done, Icel. I'm relieved to see you yet live. I'll hear all about this later, but don't think this means I've forgotten my questions." I dip my chin and stay there, waiting for the soft shuffle of her feet to disappear over the wooden floorboards and the hum of conversation to spring up inside her workshop. Only then do I spy young Cuthred, a boy once better known for climbing trees when he shouldn't have done, who now aids Winfloud in my place. He can be no older than 10 or 11. He's still slight of build. Cuthred watches on with an open mouth, a bucket of water held in front of him by both of his hands. With a solid lump in the pit of my stomach as my hand aches from its burn, he fiercely reminds me of the life I once led. I smell myself, realizing I stink of blood and death, even now, so many days on from the slaughter of the battle for Londonium. "That looks heavy," I offer when he doesn't speak. "It is, yes," Cuthred huffs. He's grown a finger's width in my absence, but no more than that. He doesn't yet have the ability to carry a full bucket in each hand. "Tell me, how's Weena, my uncle's horse?" At this, Cuthred's face alights. He drops the bucket where it is, sloshing water onto his feet and not seeming to notice as he turns to me. "Come, I'll show you. She's been well. I've ridden her once or twice," he quickly clarifies, turning to meet my gaze. I know it'll have been more than that, but I'm not angry with him. Weena is a pliant animal. She'll have been a good introduction to horse ownership for Cuthred. Perhaps one day he might have his own horse. It depends on what happens with him and Winflood, and whether or not he's called upon to fight for Mercia. If Mercia's future is devoid of war, then perhaps he can become a healer, as I once thought I'd become. If Mercia's future is to be embroiled in a war against her enemy to the south, then the role of a healer will not be his. He'll become a warrior, just as I am becoming. The thought saddens me. I hope he can lead the life I wanted. But then perhaps he wishes to become a warrior. I remain conflicted. I know what I know about healing, and it has helped me and my fellow warriors more than once, but equally, I'm learning to kill, the very opposite of what I thought I'd become. Do I miss being with Winflood? I do, yes, I can't deny that, and yet I'm honest enough to admit that becoming a warrior, having such friends as I now have, is also appealing. All around us, men and women stream to be reunited with their lovers, fathers, brothers and sons, or sob quietly on knowing they'll never see them again. King Wiglaf has been formally reunited with his wife and queen, Ecgberht, and son, Lord Wigmund, in an official ceremony of welcome, during which King Wiglaf was buoyed by his success, whereas his queen looked as stiff as her richly embroidered cloak. I can't say that either the king's wife or his son looked enamoured of Wiglaf's acclaim, even while Mercia's warriors cheered the resurgent king and the success we had against the might of Wessex. No doubt the queen has enjoyed having the management of Tamworth and Mercia in her husband's absence. I imagine Lord Wigmund would sooner his father hadn't returned as well, if I have correctly interpreted his facial expression on seeing King Wiglaf's pride, his eagle banner flying high in the stiff breeze overhead to indicate Mercia's victory. I blot out the echoes of Edwin's mother greeting her long-lost son, my childhood friend. I'm pleased for her, even if Edwin and I are no longer the allies we once were. We might have held the bridge over the River Fleet between us, but I can't say it's eased the unhappiness we feel towards one another, since Edwin was left at Kingsholm by my uncle, while Ecgberht and I resumed our wandering journey to evade the reach of the Wessex warriors. It feels a lifetime ago, and not earlier in the year. We both blame one another for what happened. I won't hear him criticize my uncle, while Edwin won't admit that my uncle acted to save his life. After all, Edwin's now a member of the Lord of Kingsholm's warriors. The same would never have happened if he'd remained in Tamworth. The Queen and the King's commander, Eric, would have seen to that. Edwin and I have ignored one another on the journey north, even while I've been overly aware of him. I've tracked him with my eyes, known where he was and what he was doing. I can't see that he's done the same with me. He seems comfortable with the rest of Lord Cornwolf's warriors. He's been accepted by them far more easily than I've been amongst Ealdorman Ælfstan's men. But then Edwin had always wanted to be a warrior, and his father was one before him. Edwin knows how to speak to men who are prepared to lay down their lives for their lord. My position has been more uncomfortable. After all, I've not trained to become a warrior, and yet I've won the notice of the king as someone who saved his life with a blade, and not with a healing poultice. The stable is busy, with young lads and girls running hither and thither, helping the stable hands to contend with a suddenly full stable. As soon as I walk beneath the sagging roof of the building, I catch sight of Weena's intelligent face hanging over her stall, from where she's been brought inside from the summer grazing lands. Has she, I considered, been waiting for me? She's ridden in and out of Tamworth enough times with my uncle to know when a war host is returning. Has she been standing there, anticipating my return? One of the more experienced stable hands has taken control of Brute outside Tamworth's walls. Brute gave the man a friendly bite on the ear for his troubles. I sympathized, but didn't offer to help. I had other matters to attend to. "Hello, girl." I hold out my left hand and let Weena smell my sweat. My right hand remains tightly bound. Theodore assures me the angry scar will grow less visible, but I can't see it. I imagine the welts from the copper wiring that decorate the hilt of my sax will permanently mark me as a Mercian more easily than the Viking raiders and their inked markings do them. Administering to Oswiu with my sax has emblazoned the burn on my hand. Where before it was faint, now it stands proud. Others might proclaim their allegiance with trinkets and sigils around their necks or along their arms, but I have Mercia burned into my skin. I don't think I can get more loyal than that. Not while I live, anyway. Weena sniffs my hand, and then licks it, tasting the salt of my sweat, a warm welcome from her. She hangs her head low then, low enough that Guthred can reach up to run his hand along the long line of her grey jaw. It seems the two have become firm allies in my absence, for all he's only just tall enough to be level with her head. How he's mounted to ride her is something I don't wish to consider. I just hope it hasn't involved a tree and a helpful branch. "Tell me," I ask him, moving inside the stables to check Weena more completely. She seems well enough. Certainly Guthred has ensured she's not eaten too much while being kept indoors rather than out on the Mercian roadways, as Brute has been. "What's been happening in my absence?" Guthred steps away from Weena's side so he can see me more easily. He shrugs his narrow shoulders. Winflad needs to see to him having a new tunic and cloak for the coming cold weather. I can see his wrists and the flash of his arms below the elbow when he lifts them. His tunic looks uncomfortably tight as well along his chest and down his arms. With all the buckets of water he must carry for Winflad, muscle has finally begun to cord his slim frame. "The Queen managed well. She saw to matters of justice and taxation." "And?" I push him. Ealdorman Sigurd was so convinced that the kingdom of the East Angles would attack that I need to know more. "There was a small altercation on the borderland with King Æthelstan of the East Angles to the east of Ermin Street, a few cuts and bruises." I smirk. Guthred speaks with the authority of Winflad. I hear the echo of her voice in those words. "And of course, Queen Ecgberht has been negotiating with Lord Cornwolf on behalf of the king in regard to his assistance at Londonium." In all honesty, this interests me more than another potential war with the kingdom of the East Angles. I've killed so many men in the last few months that I welcome not having to do so for the foreseeable future. I want only to have the wooden gates of Tamworth slammed shut on my back and to face the winter with nothing more taxing than trying to keep warm. But Lady Cinehild's future, the former Queen of Mercia, does concern me. Whatever passed between her and my uncle Senfrith, I know he would expect me to ensure she's treated fairly by King Wiglaf, now that he's no longer here to do so. I still don't know the importance of the small object I was ordered to give to her, but I appreciate that it meant something to both my uncle and Lady Cinehild. Once, she made my life torture when she was married to King Beornwulf. Now she's the one whose life could be in peril. "What do you know about the negotiations between the Queen and Lord Cornwolf?" I ask him, trying to find a smile for my suddenly tight face. "Not a lot, only that Winflad was muttering about it all." I just imagined she was. Winflad told me not to speak to Lady Cinehild of another marriage when she was placed in the nunnery at Winchcombe, even though it's to be expected that a woman of Lady Cinehild's standing should be found a second husband by her new king. The king's wife hasn't done her predecessor the same favours. Winflad says it's a pity that King Ludica's wife, Lady Edburga, remarried so quickly. It would have been better for her to be given to Lord Cornwolf in marriage, rather than wasted on a king's thane. I quite agree, but hold my tongue. King Ludica's widow is still very young. She might be more likely to breed, as I know she already has, but I can't imagine she'd bring the dour Lord Cornwolf any joy. "So the marriage will happen, then?" Guthred shrugs once more, and I realise I'm asking the boy questions he can't hope to know the answer to. It doesn't matter. Tell me of everyone else. How have they been? I've not been gone for longer than 2 months, and yet anything could have happened in my absence. Old Bjorn died. Winflad was saddened by it, but then said the old cow had been holding on for far too long, and her old body needed a rest. Another winter would have killed her, so better to go while the days weren't short and dreary. The knowledge saddens me, but it's far from unexpected. Bjorn had long been old and riddled, with twisted fingers. No amount of ointment, prepared by Winflad, could unknot them forever. Just how old Bjorn was has never been answered. I consider whether it's because Winflad is older than her and doesn't want to admit it. Not that it matters now. The bishop was a git about burying her, said she had more than a hint of the old gods about her, but Winflad ensured it all happened as it should, even if her body lies closer to the river and not the church. Winflad ensured her grave lay east to west and not north to south, as the bishop directed the grave diggers. He didn't want her to see her lord on the day of judgment. Cuthred shakes his head as he speaks. Once more I hear Winflad's words mirrored in his. I consider how much of what I used to say was actually me just repeating Winflad's words. I wonder how much of what I say now is simply more of the same. Icel! I hear Wulfhere's rough cry and run towards the stable doorway. He's standing there, hands on his hips, looking far from impressed. Ealdorman Ælfstan's commander and my ally needs to bathe, shave, and lose the sour expression on his face. His face is pinched with cold, and his cloak drags into the churned earth of the ground outside. Go and tend to your bloody horse. He's broken 2 buckets and bitten 2 people, and you're here having a nice little chat with the healer's boy. The disgust in Wulfhere's voice brings a grin to my lips. I glance at Cuthred, and he returns my smirk. I'll see you later, I console. You should get back to Winflad. No doubt she needs something doing. Tell me, who are those 2 people? Cuthred queries first, taking his chance because Wulfhere has turned away already, his shouted instructions to Oswy covering the extra question. Theodore and Gaia. They were enslaved by a Wessex healer inside Londonium. That's the one the giants built high with walls of stone, not the trading settlement. I speak as though I've always known this, which of course I haven't. Ealdorman Tidwulf has made them free, and they'll be healers now, like Winflad. Well, I freed them from Londonium, I admit, feeling I really should take some acclaim for my part in all this. She won't like that, Cuthred mutters, and I chuckle as I leave the stables and make my way through the seething mass of men and horses towards the open gate. Winflad bloody won't like it. Not one little bit. Maybe I shouldn't have been quite so quick to claim responsibility after all. I could have placed the blame at Ealdorman Tidwulf's feet. I wish I had. Cuthred, with the best will in the world, won't be shy about sharing what I've told him, and Winflad's fury will be squarely directed my way. As soon as I've fought my way through the open gateway, where the guards try desperately to keep some sort of control over the flowing thoroughfare and fail most abysmally at it, I can hear Brute's shrill screams, even above the commotion of King Wiglaf's conquering war band returning home. I shake my head at the sharp cry of the horse. The stable hand said he could control him, I muttered to Wulfhere, coming upon him as he directs carts and horses just to the far side of the ditch and embankment. I can feel the eyes of the inhabitants of Tamworth on me. No one looks impressed, and they all know that Brute is my horse. I've heard the whispers and complaints. Men and women don't like the gift the king gave me, even if I know none of them would be able to control my horse. Jealousy is a strange beast. Well, he bloody lied. Wulfhere is far from placated by my words as I amble to a run, heading to the low-lying land where warriors and horses are separating after their long journey along Watling Street from Londonia. I shake my head at the sight of Brute booking on the end of a tether, while in the distance rivers glint sullenly beneath low-hanging clouds. It's been threatening to rain for much of the day. It'll be bloody typical if it does so now, when we're all nearly back beneath the shelter of the King's Hall, when the promise of warm hearths is almost a reality. I feel all the aches and pains of a few days in the saddle as I continue to dart through carts and beast. I'll take him. I snatched the harness from the stable hand, realizing with surprise that it's not the same one as before. No, that man is on the mud-churned ground, hoof marks everywhere, curled around some pain that Brute has inflicted. Bloody horse! Brute! I hold the rein firmly, waiting for my horse to acknowledge me. He rears and kicks out once more, just missing another stable hand, who shrieks and dashes out of the way. The other horses have all moved aside, with a caution the stable hands have failed to show. Brute comes to a sudden halt, chest heaving with his rage, his breath hot and furious in my face. His eyes are wild and confused. "What's this all about, then?" My tone is softer than the words I use. "Making a bloody fuss about nothing." As soon as he's down on 4 hooves, I hold him steady, and then begin to work my way around his body. Have I missed some wound? Has he stepped on something, or gone lame? Has he thrown a shoe? Of course he hasn't. He's just unhappy. "He's a monster!" The first stable hand interjects into my perusal, the words coming in a single huff as he gasps with pain, still squirming on the ground. "He is called Brute," I confirm, absent-mindedly, surprised the connection hasn't been made by them. What sort of fool doesn't realize the name fits the beast? Why else do men and women name their daughters as Godgifu, or gift from God, if not to earn some favor in our Lord's eyes? As a people, we do tend to name our children and animals with some intention behind them. If Brute wasn't always his name, then my horse has certainly earned it since. "Does he even let you ride him?" I turn and meet the eyes of King Wiglaf's son, Wigmund, the derision ripe in his voice. Wigmund hasn't changed in my absence, well, apart from the fact he now has more of a beard and moustache on his slight face. I run my hand along my own chin, grimacing at the stubble there. Wigmund carries his blades in a weapons belt, but they shimmer with the oil of polish and not the gleam of blood, sweat, and tears, as mine do. I imagine the last thing he killed was a rat amongst the thatched roofs. Perhaps he even had someone to catch the animal for him before skewering it to death. The games of small boys are far from caring for the vermin that infests our homes. "Yes, my lord." I bow slightly, my one hand very firm on Brute's rein. It would be typical for Brute to forget himself once more. He does allow me to ride him. I've not run beside him all the way back from Londonium. I keep my voice even. Wigmund means to add oil to the fire, but I'm not inclined to argue with him. Brute is just that, a brute. He'll never be any different. I'm learning that. The stable hand at Barney thought he shackled me with a terrible horse that would embarrass me and perhaps result in my death if I was thrown from his back. The man actually gave me an excellent one, but one that needs a firm hand. It's a heady combination. I'm learning to be the master. Brute remains an unwilling student all the same. "The king, my father, should never have given you such a horse." It seems Lord Wigmund is disinclined to bring his argument to an end. I sigh softly. I've just arrived home. Wigmund has done nothing but sit on his skinny ass for the last however many months, kept safely away from the fighting so that Mercia wasn't once more left bereft of men who could be named as king, should Wiglaf die fighting the Wessex king. He was sheltered inside the monastery at Barney. He's not been in the borderlands with the Welsh kingdoms, or plunged amongst his enemy inside Londonium. Lord Wigmund's not fought to stay alive. He's not had to contend with the enemy as friends. He's not had to bury his uncle and say goodbye to the only family he's ever known. I knew Wigmund was infuriating. Now I appreciate that he really could become my enemy if he means to test me in these smallest of ways. I consider what he sees before him. Does he smirk at my dishevelled state? Does he look at my hard-worn boots and see me as poor? Does he look at my wrapped hand and see only the wound? Does he even know what I've done? I doubt it. But now really isn't the time to further expound on the actions that made the king beholden to me for his life. I'm indebted to the king, your father, for his gift. I try to defuse the situation, but Wigmund continues to sneer. I meet his gaze evenly, but he's been joined by more people. In our absence, Lord Wigmund has begun to develop his own collection of allies, it seems. I note that not all of them are as young as we are. Even some of the older men surround Wigmund, those who didn't ride to war. I narrow my eyes. At whose instigation has this been started? The king's? It seems doubtful. At Wigmund's? Again, I can't see it. No, I'm sure it'll be his mother. Queen Ecgberht isn't blind to the fact that, of all Mercia's recent rulers' wives, she's the only one to have a son who could become king should something befall his father. And his father has ridden to war not once but twice since the summer. While King Wiglaf might have been victorious, other powerful enemies remain on Mercia's borders. I suppose I should be pleased with the development, but it makes me uneasy. I've heard of overpowerful women in the past. They can cause just as many problems as the overpowerful men. If I asked Winflat about it, she'd tell me the story of King Penda's son's wife, the Northumbrian princess who killed him because she detested him so much, slipping her blade through his chest while he slept. She would also tell me of how another of King Penda's son's wives was killed by her Mercian bodyguard. She'd tell me it was because women can be just as much a threat as men. I heed those words. Lord Wigmund. Someone thinks to save me. I recognize the voice as that of Ealdorman Ælfstan. Has he suddenly become more favourable towards me? It would please me to add another to the small number of men I can count as a friend in the king's court. Without further words, Lord Wigmund and his entourage turn to face the dark-skinned Ealdorman, and I flash him a smile of thanks over the head of the king's son. Ealdorman Ælfstan doesn't seem to notice me, but I'm sure there can be no other reason for him distracting Wigmund in such a way. Perhaps, as I brought him Theodore and Gaia, he means to repay that kindness with one of his own. Eagerly I face Brute once more, desperate to make our escape before my horse becomes spooked once more. Shall we? I inquire, and my horse moves forwards, head bowed, suddenly pliant now that I've returned to him, his black and white coat shimmering even with the overcast sky. He might have ridden to war and back again, but he's fit and well, the length of the road disappearing beneath his hooves with ease. Apologies, I call to the men who've fallen foul of Brute's evil temper. I would seek out Inflad for those bites, and she'll have something for the bruises as well, I add helpfully, thinking of how I'd treat them if they were going to ask me for assistance. I think I'd opt for yarrow, woodruff, wild carrot, and the leaves of a dandelion. That would do the trick, provided I could find a dandelion. It's not truly the season for them. I'd need to have kept some stored from the bountiful early summer to ensure they contained the right potency. So spoken, I lead on to the gate inside Tamworth, but not before pausing to examine the defences of the king's capital, tinged with my new-found knowledge from Londonium. There's no stone to be found anywhere along the walls and ditch. There's a deep trench filled with a damp mess of drying grasses and other less pleasant items, discarded from cook-pots and also from the latrines. There are also tall wooden walls above the ditch, and above them the guardsmen can keep a good watch when the traffic in and out is much reduced. But I'm reminded of Londonium and its huge grey walls. How did those giants who constructed it, and I'm inclined to believe, as Wulfhere does, that they must have been giants, ensure the stones stayed upright? Icel! My name rings through the camp, and I wince to hear the fury in the voice, even as I slip onto Brute's back and hasten onwards. What is it? I demand on nearing the gateway into Tamworth, only to see Ealdorman Ælfstan looking smug and pleased with himself as the Queen glowers at me. Just what has Ealdorman Ælfstan done now? And just what does the Queen think I've done? Chapter 2. That horse is a menace, Ealdorman Ælfstan informs me through gritted teeth. At his side, Queen Ecgberht is white of face. He shouldn't have been anywhere near Lord Wigmund, the Queen commands, her tone imperious, for all it trembles a little. I feel my forehead furrow, trying to make sense of this. I open my mouth, but notice Wulfhere shake his head from his place on the road into Tamworth. A space has opened up around the Queen and me. Lord Wigmund isn't anywhere to be seen. Who then has been telling of our brief conversation? I'm sure I was polite to the King's son, even if I didn't wish to be. My Queen, My apologies. I bow from my saddle, ensuring my control of Brute is maintained by gripping him tightly with my thighs. Ealdorman Ælfstan stands in front of the Queen, or rather, he almost does. In fact, it's the Queen's guard who shields her, with the Ealdorman hiding just behind them. What a warrior the man is. A horse such as that has no place in the King's war band. Queen Senethryth persists, her words too strong. She isn't truly fearful, I surmise, at least not for herself. The beast should be shackled to a plough. That's all it's good for. What's this? Ealdorman Ælfstan appears at the commotion taking place before the gate, and I'm aware that everyone is watching what happens now. No one moves. I run my hand down Brute's left shoulder, hoping he'll remain calm. This animal is wild, the Queen announces, chin high, defiance on her lined face. The Queen is no longer a young woman, her son a man grown, and she tries to hide her wrinkled face with artfully arranged hair and a thin veil to cover her silvering locks. But here in the daylight all her years are laid bare. If not for this animal, I'd be dead, Ealdorman Ælfstan confirms, his tone bland. The King has gifted the horse to young Icel for his actions in saving his life. The horse was the King's to gift, and he did so. I'm unsure why Ealdorman Ælfstan says this. The Queen must know. Certainly everyone else does. The Queen flashes an ungrateful look towards Ealdorman Ælfstan. Perhaps she doesn't wish to be reminded that her husband almost died in the Welsh borderlands. Certainly she doesn't wish to be reminded that she should show any gratitude towards me. He must be kept away from the King's son, she continues, as though the Ealdorman hasn't spoken, and, indeed, from any of the King's other horses. He's a menace. He'll cause disruption in the stables. He'll do no such thing. Now the King is involved, as his voice rises above all other. I don't know who's alerted him to this as well. I wish I was wearing my helm, so that I could hide my astonishment on my face. Brute is but one horse. I'm unsure why he's causing such a commotion. It's not as though Lord Wigmund was ever in danger from Brute. He might have been from me, but not from my horse. And even if Brute nipped him, that's only what any animal would have done. Take him inside the settlement, the King commands from his position at the gateway, where he's been standing, speaking words of encouragement to his exhausted warriors as they trudge inside their home. Go, Wulfred whispers sharply, stepping to my side. Get the animal settled beside Weena, and tell him not to draw any more bloody attention to himself. I nod quickly, bow once more to the Queen and Ealdorman Ælfstan, and only then lead Brute over the wooden bridge and beneath the gateway. All the time I'm aware of eyes on me, and sweat trickles down my back, pooling at the top of my trews. I only breathe deeply once I dismount, and my two animals share a nicker of welcome with one another, heads touching over the side of their stables. With Brute finally settled, and perhaps as bemused as I am about all the fuss his appearance has caused, I turn to make my way to Winflad's workshop, before remembering that it's no longer my home. No, I sleep with Mercia's warriors now, in a bunkhouse, where all of the unmarried men sleep. Guthred has my place in the workshop. I'm not sure how I feel about that. The bunkhouse is not uncomfortable. If anything, it actually smells better than Winflad's workshop on some occasions. But it's not truly my home. I've been given my uncle's sleeping space. When I first slept here, in the short space of time in between returning from the borderlands with the Welsh and riding to Londonium with the King's warriors, I found little of Senfrith's possessions. After all, the Wessex warriors had been making use of it in Wiglaf's absence from Tamworth. Still, there were 2 tunics which were once Senfrith's. Even now they smell of him, and I won't wear them, and neither will I get rid of them. They're my reminder that this was once his place and his home, no matter that he's gone from my side. I keep them in my wooden chest alongside my few other possessions. I lower myself onto my bed, mindful that I stink of the road. If I lie down, I'll sleep, and I need to wash the muck from my matted hair first. But the temptation to sleep is also great. I look around me, There are other men bending to return tunics and trews to their small wooden chests from their saddlebags. There are also those arguing or embracing or weeping at the gaps left in the bunk room by the absence of those who died retrieving Londonium from the Wessex king's grasp. I don't know if a full accounting of the dead has yet been made. I'm sure that someone, somewhere, will know the names of all those who died. Some clerics will have been given the task. I close my eyes in memory, seeing the sightless faces of all those forever staring men I trampled over on the slaughter field at the end of the battle. Purposefully, I don't consider the dead Wessex warriors, other than Tyrtil. He was a good man. I'll mourn him even if he was my enemy. I saved his life inside Londonium, and in turn he helped keep me alive. The younger Britwold I won't mourn. He tried to kill me in the end. I can't deny that I'm pleased I live while he's dead. But Tyrtil deserved to live. A man as honourable as him shouldn't have died the way he did. From nearby I hear the raised voices of my fellow warriors Garwulf and Frithwine. I've forgotten they'd be in the bunkhouse as well. I could do with not having to listen to them. They're so filled with confidence after events in Londonium that I think they've forgotten Frithwine was almost crushed to death by his fellow countrymen before they could make a name for themselves as part of Ealdorman Ælfstan's infiltration of Londonium. I listen to them now from my place in the bunkhouse. As I prepare to take myself outside to bathe in the huge wooden tubs the servants are struggling to keep filled with clean and hot water. Frithwine and Garwulf have found some youngster to regale with their battle glories. Damn fools! They'd be better served in keeping their mouths shut and allowing others to mourn, now that we're finally somewhere it's possible to do so, and can lower our guard, as there are others to protect us. I can hear them even through the walls of the bunkhouse as I strip, unheeding of those who might see my nakedness, and settle into the warmish water. It's not big enough for me, my knees almost touching my chin, but I crave being clean. My mind revolves to the memories of my time in Londonium, and if not for the warmth of the water, I'd shudder with cold. It was a grim day when we buried the dead in one of the many churchyards in Londonwick. A visibly relieved Bishop S.J.A, free from the Wessex overlord, intoned over the bodies, his pleasure at being free from King Ecgberht's commands easy to see. The grave wasn't a small one, but rather large enough to take the bodies of all the Mercian dead. I counted close enough to 50 men, 33 of them from the failed attack on the Mint. I recognized the faces of the dead and heard familiar names being wailed by their surviving allies and friends, but many of the men were strangers to me. I mourned them as Mercians and pitied them their deaths as the jolting of bodies flung callously into the deep ditch exposed wounds and nakedness for all to see. A great deal of pale flesh was displayed that day. Many vomited at the sight of so much destruction. But I stood and watched, just as Ealdorman Ælfstan and the king did. Ealdorman Sigurd showed himself to be craven, turning aside, his face as pale as the dead. Theodore and Gaia stoically stood and watched. I could only imagine their thoughts of being free from Ecgberht. The ceremony was sullen, but only for a while, even the bishop unable to keep the joy from his mournful dirge. Men victorious in battle seemed little concerned with sorrow, giddy only with being alive and living to receive praise and silver from their king as soon as the earth was pushed back into place over their less fortunate comrades. As for the Wessex warriors, some of the dead were burned close to the River Thames on a pyre made from the ruins of the ships used in their unsuccessful strike on Londonwick. I watched the sodden sail of the ships, festooned with the Wessex wyvern, burn with a ferocity that should have been impossible for something so wet and soaking. I thrilled to know that our ravages would be clearly visible from the Wessex side of the River Thames. It was both a warning for those sheltering Wessex men who still lived, and an easier means of disposing of so many dead from the final attack. Lord Ethelwulf and King Ecgberht would have seen the smoke as it filled the sky, and known only too well its portend. There were many more dead Wessex warriors than Mercians, even before we'd entered Londonium. I counted over 100 pairs of lifeless limbs, stripped of all they'd once owned and claimed. I witnessed old wounds, long since healed, and the gaping holes of those fatal losses. The healer in me calmly considered how such wounds could be treated had not men lost all of their lifeblood in the attack. The smell of the charnel house infected Londonium as the flames leapt higher from the funeral pyre outside the settlement, the bank of smoke almost blocking out the dim light from the watery sun. The fort building which Ealdorman Ælfstan commanded we occupy as our first action inside Londonium was stripped of its dead, everywhere else being strewn with the dead. I witnessed men I'd healed in Ecgberht's hut, lying beyond all means of my assistance as I walked by the now familiar roads inside Londonium. With Wulfhere to one side, he recounted the story of events inside the fort building itself. While Ealdorman Ælfstan had managed to gain entry alongside the rest of our small Mercian force of Frithwina, Garwulf, Cynred, Wulfhere, and Ælfstan, Oswy and I had been too slow to do so, but it was a bloody battle for them. We had to fight through the Wessex warriors trying to stop us. Cynred led the way, with Athelmod and Quotherman doing the same from inside the fort. It was a bloody mess at the end. The doorway was too small for such a fight. We needed you then, Icel. Cynred took a bad wound and was no good to any of us. The cut almost severed his left hand. Gaia told me that it will take time for Cynred to regain the same function he once had. But as Cynred told me, smiling around his pain, he can at least hold out hope that he'll be able to wipe his arse with his left hand again one day. I must have missed it all, I commiserated. By the time I arrived at the fort, I'd known that Oswy and I wouldn't be able to gain admittance, thanks to the howling Wessex warriors outside it. Aye, lad, well, you saved Oswy, so you have my thanks for that. A bloody stupid design, Wulfhere further grumbled, building the fort to the side of the roadway and gates. Bloody stupid, I agreed, but only for those stuck inside it, not for those thinking to use it as a final means of sanctuary. Still, we trod the roadway through Londonium, first to Ecgberht's workshop, where Theodore and Gaia were carefully removing everything that would help them in their new life. I smiled to see them. Theodore bent to inspect my hand, shaking his head, while Gaia translated his words for me. "Is it so hard to keep it dry?" he chastised, using her voice. "Yes," I replied, "when there's a bloody great big battle going on, and I have to cross a river to get to the enemy." Swiftly he and Gaia moved to change my bandage. I wanted to ask them about Teotil. He died here, but his body was gone. Theodore offered me a sorrowful glance, and I swallowed heavily. It was better that I didn't know. I walked away from the workshop, grateful that I would never have to see the place again. I'd not wanted to return to it at all, but the pull of the place couldn't be ignored. The matter of Ecgberht's killing will remain a secret. There's no one left to ask after him, and I've no intention of mentioning it to anyone. As far as I'm concerned, Ecgberht's death was a matter of life and death, undertaken during a war, of which Mercia were the victors. The part played by Gaia in his death was irrelevant. She didn't mean to kill him by clouting him over the head with a heavy jug. All the same, his death has ensured me, Gaia, and Theodore stay alive. Once more, on the roads that led deeper into Londonium, we'd come across King Wiglaf and the Ealdorman. Ealdorman Sigurd rode with a cloth held close to his nose, determined to keep the rancid smell away. But between the smoke still smouldering from the ruins close to the river gate and the ripe smell of the boggy ground close to the river Walbrook running through the settlement, I'd found it difficult to smell anything. Wessex bodies had been pulled out of the King's Way, and Wiglaf was focused firmly on the ancient two-story building where we had attacked Ealdorman Wassa and his men. "Icel, Wulfhere, escort us to the forum," the king commanded, my name coming easily to his lips. I swallowed against the unease in my stomach. I knew what we'd find, and, if anything, it was even worse than my fears. The ripe scent of blood reached us even there, with the white statues and their inscrutable expressions watching us from their places outside the building. When King Wiglaf demanded Wulfhere and I precede him into the building used as the Ealdorman's hall, we had to force aside prostrate bodies lying cold and marbled. I eyed the man I'd killed there, the one who'd thought to crush me, but who hadn't quite managed to do so, thanks to Oswy. I heard the telltale scamper of rats and other beasts, disturbed from feasting by our footsteps, breaking the silence of the grave. Immediately I was forced to turn aside, almost running into King Wiglaf with my speed. He said nothing, and while Ealdorman Ælfstan refused to enter the building, Ealdorman Ælfstan and Tidwulf accompanied the king. The king wanted to see the face of his enemy. Wulfheard reappeared first, his face pale so that the bruises and cuts taken in the fight at the fort were starkly etched onto his face. He came to my side, eyeing me with understanding on his lined face. "A nasty business," he confirmed, only then turning away to vomit noisily onto the stone of the forum floor. I turned my back on the building, distracting myself with examining the ancient statues once more. They were already missing noses, hands, feet, and ears, but now many of them were also painted with the shed blood of the Wessex warriors. What had they witnessed in their years, I considered? No doubt events about which I was entirely ignorant. The blood, I decided, would wash from them eventually, with a few heavy rainstorms, and still they'll stand. The thought astounded me. If only I could know all that they'd seen. Would it make me wiser? I shook my head at such folly, even as I took the time to examine the smooth faces, hands, arms, and legs. I'd truly never seen anything like it before. Even the stone, so glossy beneath my fingers, was a wonder to me. What sort of person had possessed such skill to wrought something so perfectly from solid stone, I'd thought. And then my mind swirled around me. These ancient statues resembled men and women such as me, and Wulfheard, Winflad, and Lady Cinnahild. What had they possessed that we so lacked, to build such as they had? "Burn it." King Wiglaf's voice lacked some of its usual severity as he reappeared from inside the corpse-strewn building of the forum. I was pleased with his decision, even if I knew the stone of the forum wouldn't burn. "Bring what combustibles we have. That place will never be cleared of the taint of the Wessex scum, if it's not entirely cleansed by fire," King Wiglaf further commanded, and every man there pretended not to hear the wobble of the king's voice. And it wasn't easy to accomplish, for if Londonium could have provided such things as wood and animal dung for burning, then London Wig